Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
And now, Tim Dillon is going to hell.
Welcome to Tim Dillon is Going to Hell, everybody. Thank you for listening. Very excited to have our guest on today. A sentence I never thought I'd say. New York Times comedy critic Jason Zinoman is here. Thank you for coming in.
Great to be here, Tim.
I appreciate it. Thank you for running this by nobody at your place of employment, your place of business.
They have no idea I'm here in hell with you.
I am sure they don't, and we appreciate that. We appreciate how free you are. Jason has written a wide variety of articles for a lot of different publications about theater, about comedy. He started his job as a comedy critic with the Times in 2011. I think you're the first critic because it's a newly created position.
True.
You're the first guy that's doing that. And you've also written a few books. You have Letterman, the Last Great Giant of Late Night, which that is a fact. That is true. And also Shock Value about horror movies. So
yeah.
We have a horror movie podcast on the network. If you're a fan of horror movies, you might want to pick that book up. You know, I want to get the Letterman book and I want to read that because I grew up watching Letterman sneaking downstairs and watching either Arsenio Hall or Letterman.
Is that true?
When I was a little kid, absolutely.
What period was your era of Letterman?
90s.
90s. Like
90s.
Mid-90s, late 90s?
Mid to late 90s.
So right when he goes to CBS.
Absolutely.
And were you like, if you like Letterman, you're cool. If you like Leno, you're useless.
I was never into Leno, and I do have that belief. I did acquire that belief later on.
Right.
But now I've softened on that, and I'm like, it doesn't really matter. But that title of that book, The Last Great Giant of Late Night, is really like, to me, you can't really debate that. Can you even watch Late Night now with the Muppets and the singing, people playing checkers with Miss Piggy, people singing with Taylor Swift? Does this excite you as a guy that's a critic of comedy?
Right.
Does this do anything for you? Are you able to get through it?
I get through it because it's my job. But
that's a rousing endorsement of the current late night.
But your leading question is one which I generally agree with, which is that there's not a lot. I mean, I think this is true of Saturday Night Live too. There's not a lot of exciting, interesting comedy going on these shows. There's some,
right?
And there's a lot of sameness. I mean, I think, and that, but so you can. The thing about my position is I have a lot of freedom of what I could write about.
Right.
So you can just see what I write. I don't write about I could write about late night every week if I wanted to.
Right.
And if
or podcasting, which you never write about.
I
never write about.
I do occasionally.
You mention it briefly every now and then, but it's never the subject of a whole article.
It has been. It has been. That's not true. But,
so I'm wrong.
But it's a legitimate criticism. I will take that. That particularly we were talking before this thing started about how you get more attention from your podcast
100%
than your Netflix special. Now, if that's the case, then you could say, the fact that I spend so much time covering Netflix specials is a mistake because if the audience is really focused on comedians shooting the shit, then I should be reviewing that. I would push back on that a lit. I don't think that's an art form.
What, podcasting?
I don't think two comedians like talking about the issues of the day for an hour and a half is an art form like stand-up comedy.
I think you're wrong, and I think it's becoming. Well, I think here's the thing.
Explain it to me. What?
Well, let me tell you why. Because I think if there are certain shows, certain podcasts out there that are completely. The barrier to entry of podcasting, like stand-up comedy, is very low.
Right.
You have a lot of people doing these podcasts. I think in one of your articles you said it feels like a duty. Some comics doing them, they feel like a duty. They don't seem, particularly none of them seem inspired. These shows that you're listening to.
Some do.
Some of them are really phenomenal. Some of them are really great.
That's true.
If you listen to Serial, which is something that NPR did, for example.
Yeah, but forget that. Let's talk about comedy. There's phenomenal comedy podcasts.
Comedy Bang Bang and things like that are very, very funny. And that's and like a show like Come Town, for example, which is insanely popular, makes $60,000 a month on Patreon or something like that. If you listen to the show, it's incredibly funny. It's three comedians that are really funny, that have a great comic sensibility. Why is that not valid in the way that it would be? And then listen, people go to these live events.
Let me answer your question.
Yeah.
It's completely the amount of comedy podcasts that I listen to today is so much more than I did 3 years ago, 5 years ago. I listen to this crappy podcast all the time. All right, I listen to and I find it as a journalist, it's incredibly useful.
Right.
I learn about new comedians this way. I learn about, but it is true that. I've yet to be convinced, and I have written columns on podcast as art form, right? So I have done that. And there are, for instance, there's a woman at the New Yorker who just covers podcasts, right?
Okay.
And I'm starting to I could be susceptible to being convinced that podcasts. So to answer your question, podcasts are clearly valid as a major form in comedy right now. Are they, the original question that I was surprised to say believe in, is saying, is a comedian's talking to each other on a podcast as much of an art form as a stand-up special? Wait a second. That's different than saying a lot of people like it. That's different than saying it's popular. I don't give a shit if it's popular. I don't have to cover
to me, the
popular. The question is it an art form, which is totally different than, is it relevant? Is it popular, etc.?
It's a medium that I think, when it's done really well, can, like radio, be an art form. I think the Howard Stern show is an art form because it's one of the funniest shows that has ever been. There are skits that have been done on the Howard Stern show that are timeless, that are hilarious, that are very funny. I don't think that you could say that that's not a form of art.
Let's break that down.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I think Howard Stern's one of the greatest interviewers who ever lived, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's what, and especially Howard Stern right now.
Sure.
Okay, I don't hear...
And that's an art.
I'm not, it's some, I interview people, right? Like, I don't consider that an art, right?
Okay.
Like, so I think
Get better at it.
Touche. No, I think Howard Stern right now is different than Howard Stern 20 years ago.
Sure.
What Howard Stern is great at right now is doing interviews with really famous people.
Right.
And I pay attention to him, but I don't review every Howard Stern interview like I do an art. I don't consider it that. That's my choice. Now, when I see a stand-up doing a special, okay, I consider that an art. Or now there are some podcasts I've listened to that I feel okay. First of all, there's some podcasts that deal, that are more scripted, that are more that have characters, that have jokes, that use sort of improv in a way, like that are just as much as improv jokes. There's some podcasts I've listened to that are actually like criticism.
Sure.
The first podcast I reviewed was actually Julie Klausner's podcast.
Okay.
And my take on it was that she kind of blends comedy, criticism.
Right.
She had like a 25-minute monologue to start out the show, which was sort of free associative, but also making jokes and doing things that she couldn't have done in stand-up or other things. And I was like, oh, she's doing something that I hadn't heard before. And I've heard that in other places too. As I said, I really like podcasts. I really listen to them. And maybe I'm not spending enough time reviewing them properly as art, but
it's also some of the podcasts, which I think is an adequate defense, is some of the biggest podcasts that comedians do aren't necessarily comedy podcasts. Joe Rogan's podcast is not a comedy podcast.
No, it's not.
But it's one of the biggest podcasts in the world, if not the biggest, So, and there are comedians on it, and comedians have built a following by being on, But
let's be fair now.
Yeah.
You started shitting on late night.
Yes.
Let's shit on podcasts because it deserves it. The podcasts are just as much homogenous, and they have just as much copycat, and there's just as much careerism.
The difference is there's not four of them. Late night shows, there's 3 or 4 of them. Podcasts, there's so many of them. The good ones rise to the top, whereas you have, listen, the ones that attract.
Do the good ones rise to the top? Do you believe that too?
I think Rogan's a great podcast.
Do you believe the good ones rise to the top?
Some of them do.
Some of them do.
They attract an audience.
Just like some comedians, good ones rise to the top. Sometimes
there is no late night show that you can watch right now and truly enjoy, if you're being honest, from the beginning to the end of the show.
I'm only honest. Don't tell me I'm not being honest.
No, but there's not.
You're the one who might not get a late night set, so you be careful.
I don't want to.
I got nothing to do with being careful.
I don't want to perform next to Miss Piggy, who's playing footsie or Twister with the host.
So you're saying if you got offered a late night set, you would turn it down?
I've turned them down. I've turned them down because I don't think my comedy is going to work as well in that environment as it will in other environments. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that I won't do one eventually.
Okay.
But it just means that there's great comics at that medium. And there's great. I don't want to hear every comic of a podcast.
Sure.
Just in the same way, I don't want every comic to do a really tight TV clean 5 minutes.
Sure.
I want everybody to be kind of different. What I wanted to ask you is something that it's interesting as a critic.
Yeah.
You have all of these different avenues now for people to get their content out, whether it's putting it on YouTube or social media and stuff like that. And then people, criticism has been democratized.
Right.
People can kind of review things they like. They can recommend them. They can share them. Why do critics have a job right now?
Right.
What do you think in your mind? What is the value that people like you bring to the climate right now? Why are you working?
Such a warm welcome here from Tim
It's a warm
Dillon.
welcome. I'm curious. I would pose this to a restaurant critic, to a theater critic.
Right. It's actually a good question.
Yeah.
It's belligerent and unfriendly, but it's
Yes.
a good question. Because you're right. Criticism has everyone has a platform now. So why should anyone listen to me? Right?
100%.
Why should anyone listen? And I didn't go to school for criticism. There's no
Right.
degree I have.
Right.
So I'm not a doctor who has some kind of special narrow expertise.
Right.
And the answer is that there is no reason.
Right.
There is absolutely no reason.
Okay.
That the reason you listen to me is just like you, Tim.
Yeah.
You have to earn it.
Interesting.
You have to.
Okay.
My actual authority. Okay. The reality is people read me because I'm associated with the New York Times. Okay.
Yes.
That's the reality. Just like
Right.
if you're at the Comedy Cellar, people go to the Comedy Cellar. They go
Yes.
there. Okay. That's the reality. The way I actually think about it, and the way I think is that because there's terrible people at the best, most prestigious media publication, just like there's terrible comedians at the best places, right?
I know.
So you actually earn your authority through hard work, through
Okay.
a dedication to craft, and through a track record that you build. Oh, I've been doing this for 2 decades.
Okay.
And some people think I suck. They won't read me and they won't listen. And
Right.
enough people think I'm good enough
Yeah.
that I keep the job. Now, but I actually find the democratization of criticism fantastic.
Yeah.
Like I think it's being the critic for because the reality is I have a huge platform.
Yeah.
It's a lot of responsibility. I take my job real seriously.
Right.
Right. I don't think I should be. I think I should be kept on my toes. Right.
Right.
But I don't think it's. I think it's actually quite similar to comedian. You didn't get a degree.
No.
You didn't get a maybe, and some people do. They study comedy. They're no better than someone who'd never studied comedy. You don't
Right.
need to go to school. You don't need any kind of special expertise. You have to earn it. And then even when you do become successful, right? If you start sucking, people are going to say,
Yeah.
hey, this guy sucks.
No, absolutely.
Right? There's no way. It's now. I happen to think that criticism is tremendously important, and that if you look at the history of art, the times when there have been really fertile artistic scenes, there's also been really fertile critical scenes, writing about them, engaging with it. And, throughout my life, when I'm covering theater, or I'm covering film, or I'm covering comedy, I really, I've heard this from the smarter artists,
Yeah.
that they understand that
The ones with no following.
the
Smarter artists, the ones that die poor, alone like a dog.
artists, I think smart artists understand that like to do it their work and then it to drop in a forest and never be heard,
Right.
is worse.
Of
than
course.
having your work be engaged with in an intelligent way by someone who studies the field.
One of the things that was interesting to me is when I did the Glasgow Comedy Festival, and I'm a nobody, and I'm in Scotland. The audiences were amazing, and they wrote an entire review of the show, and they wrote a major write-up, and it wasn't that they didn't write it because they were offended. They didn't write it because they were scandalized by something someone said. They weren't making a specific political point. They literally sat there and they were reviewing a comedy show, and they were really doing their due diligence. They looked me up. They put all this, all these things about my life together, and they wrote, this is what he did. This is what worked. This is what could have been better. And there's something amazing about the culture of criticism in the UK. Maybe it's because from theater, but you guys, not necessarily you, but you guys.
This is. I've heard this from more than one comedian.
You guys are
It's-
always
it's-
writing
it's-
about
it's-
when you're mad, or when we say something offensive, or when you guys are scandalized, or when you're trying to make a political point.
Does it matter if you're wrong here? Does it matter?
Absolutely.
Does it matter if you're wrong?
You're telling me.
I mean, does
yeah.
it matter? Seriously.
Yeah.
Here's the truth. If you
Yeah.
want to actually know
Yes.
the truth about
Yes.
the media and I've heard it's gotten into comedy circles that the UK reviews every single set at a
They are
comedy club.
lovely people. The UK is lovely people. They are beautiful people. They come and review.
How many British comedians have you met?
I don't know.
They hate the press more than anybody. Are you kidding me?
Well, the press can make or break their careers over there.
The only place where the press review, the reason American comedians think that is because when they go to Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Fringe, which is genuinely a unique festival. There's nothing like it in the world. And then because it's so unique, there's a kind of a culture of festivals over there. Maybe Glasgow is another one.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of press at Edinburgh. So an American comics go there, they get reviewed in this way that they don't usually get reviewed. They get reviewed like a piece of theater does.
Right.
But if you go to comedy clubs in England, those people aren't getting reviews every time.
Okay, and that's fair.
And if anything, there's so much more comedy here. And trust me.
So we could do that here. Why don't we do that here? We have so many comedy festivals in America where press can be reviewing comedy.
The New York, I mean, look, I'll put the quantity of coverage that myself and my peers have up against this incredible fictional British comedy press that you and Todd Barry, I've heard
they're
this before.
Amazing people.
They're the greatest, most brilliant writers. Everyone of Faulkner.
They gave us
everyone.
Good reviews. They calm, they're respectful.
You know what it is that they treat you like you're an exotic beast. You're like, oh, it's American
It is
comedian.
nice to be treated like an exotic beast.
I know, I'm sure it is.
It is very nice.
I'm sure it is. And it's fascinating now that stand-up is so global. Just yesterday, I got an email from a Swede.
Yeah.
A Swedish comedy journalist who wants to come here and talk to me about how to be a better comedy critic.
Isn't that amazing? No American is emailing anyone saying, how do I get better at being a critic? That has never happened, but the Swedish... Do you see what I mean?
Listen to this.
Anybody writing at Medium?
Guy trashing
is there
right
anybody
here.
writing at Medium that goes, how can I get better? When did you start?
Usually I just listen to your podcast and I hear comedians just trash and the press in ways that are just
we don't always
straight lies.
Yeah.
And then I have to be like, fuck, no one's here to
You
correct
have to
them.
admit some of the articles that are written are hysterical.
I have look. Just like Tim, if we were actually honest, you'd be a harsher critic of the comedy world than I would.
Sure.
I'm sure if we got down to it, you would trash. You don't like to trash other comedians that you told me on the show.
But
I'm sure if we turn the mics off, you would.
We turn the mics on, and I will.
I have a very I probably have a harsher critique of the comedy press than you were.
Sure.
In part because I actually am talking about what's there, as opposed to this fictional. Everything is a Twitter mob. Everything is,
But there's a lot of Twitter mob. Not everything is, but there is a lot. But you can't just ignore.
I don't ignore. We can talk about it. Talk about it. I think, but you lose credibility though when you act like when you say I can't say. The Twitter mob tells me is censoring me. No, they're not.
I'm not saying that the Twitter mob is censoring.
And 50 years ago, look, if you take a step back, and you give a little historical perspective, the idea that a comedian could have a national platform for saying, rape jokes or Parkland jokes, right? If you told someone in the 50s that, they would say, "Get the fuck out of here! What are you talking about?"
They would also say, "Black people can't go to school with me."
No, they would say, "If you say water closet, you're going to be censored from national television."
Sure.
We're in this unique period where everyone is a national platform.
Sure.
And turns out there's pushback, right? There's pushback because in the old days you didn't have that, right?
Yeah.
So actually, I mean, look, you're absolutely right. There is these Twitter mobs are a real thing. There is a moralism about the way that. Comedy press. I'm
a little uncomfortable with knee-jerk vigilantism, where people are trying to wield the anger of an online mob to try to elevate their own position, to get likes, to get clicks, to get eyeballs, and whatever the hell they're doing, and they'll drag somebody and try to ruin their career. And to me, that is objectionable. I see that and I go, it's immoral.
But here's my advice to you. Here's how that because I sympathize with a lot of that.
Yeah.
But where you lose credibility, right, is the general problem with the way a lot of the treatment of comics, especially these like problematic jokes is the same problem with what you just had and how you characterize the press, which is that it's a complete lack of good faith. It's always the worst faith reading of everything. So it's like, of course, the reason that these people are doing this is because they want to elevate themselves, get clicks and tear down
that's
somebody
why
else.
they're doing this.
Some of them that might
exactly
be. You're
why
not in
they're
there.
doing
You're not
this.
in that. You're not in their head. In the same way that some of the people writing the articles would say, "Oh, you're just a racist bigot, and that's the real reason you want to do it. It's not to make people laugh." That must be annoying, right?
That's a fundamental misunderstanding of what comedy
exactly.
is.
And you're giving a fundamental misunderstanding of how the press works. So it goes both ways. If you just make the exact same point on the substance without getting inside the heads of someone you can't do, and to be a little bit humble about the world you don't know. One thing I think is important for me as someone who writes about the comedy world is to be humble about what I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. One thing that's different than me than most people is that I'm a critic and I'm a reporter. I spend a lot of time talking to people like you.
Yes.
I talk to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. You've reached out for peace.
I'll reach out if I don't understand something, which is all the fucking time.
Yeah.
I will. Before I wrote a piece, about UCB. Not paying people.
Right.
I went to several people at UCB and I said, look, give me your best argument for why I'm wrong.
Right.
Okay. That to me seems fair. I want to be. I didn't soft pedal.
What did
my
they
piece.
do? They go into the economics of slavery, how it built up the South. Is that is that how they?
I was stunned what they did. I mean, it was.
They're closing now, right? It's all over for them.
I think they're falling apart.
They've been found out.
I think this thing has hurt them actually.
Yeah.
I think it's hurt them because I think a lot of their currency was being cool.
And for those people that don't know, the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater is a major improv theater. I performed there, and it's launched people like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler and some of the funniest people in the world. And Amy Poehler, I think, is a part owner of it. And they've never, what is it? They didn't pay their employees, right? They've never paid an employee. They don't pay comedians.
On principle.
On principle.
That's the difference. There's always been arts institutions that have not paid people.
And they're hip and cool, but they just want everyone to starve.
Exactly. Well,
they want them to eat cool. Eat cool for dinner.
Yeah, basically.
So now one of their theaters is closing. You think it's going to fall apart now? You think?
I hope they don't fall apart, but I think that they still have two theaters in LA, and they have a theater which is a terrible location now up in 42nd Street.
Yeah, bad move.
But yeah, the point is that I think the fundamental problem with like this endless battle between like comedians and public is just a complete lack of good faith on all ends.
Sure.
That I think you have a right to be pissed off that there is a huge amount of ignorance about, say, like the process of how comedy gets made.
Yes.
So Louis' joke at Governor's
being leaked
gets compared to Louis' Netflix special.
Right.
That to me, look, I didn't write about that. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure I felt, not anyone telling me, but I felt a lot of pressure because everyone wrote about it, and I want to write about what people are writing about.
Yeah.
But on principle, I did not do that.
Good for you.
Because I've been covering this. I'm not patting myself in the back. It's just I'm not quite as ignorant about this field as I was when I started doing this.
Right.
And I know that at some point he'll have something to come out. It'll be a finished product.
Yeah.
And it'll be a stronger piece to write. Comparing apples to apples. So it must be. I'm sure it is incredibly frustrating for comedians to see that. And let me be clear. It's not just journalists weighing in on that. It's also other comedians. So this kind of bad faith is all over the place.
You've written that comedy is more, that comedy has done more to change the national conversation than any other art form.
That's it?
Yeah, you said something in the vein of that. The comedy really helps drive the conversation. You wrote an article about Jon Stewart, an article about, you mentioned a few different people, but Jon Stewart was huge. The Daily Show is where a lot of people got their news.
Yeah.
I think you also mentioned in that article, it was an article about, what should comedy be in this new climate, in this, people are arguing. And you said, and I love one of the quotes from that article, you said, comedy's now invaded the spaces that once were kind of reserved for more sober voices in our society. Whether they be journalists or whatever, people in the political arena, comedy's come into those spaces. You said that David Letterman's After 9/11 monologue was one of the, things that established a precedent for late night hosts being kind of emotional, something that Jimmy Kimmel's done recently and has gotten some flack for. Do you think that there is not an argument now that there is much more of a backlash? You had every single celebrity tell people not to vote for Trump. Every single major comedian, most of them, all of Hollywood, most of the media tell people not to vote for Trump. And he won. Don't you think there's an argument now that there's more of a backlash from people that feel patronized and people that really don't necessarily want to be told how to live by people that are lounge acts, essentially.
I think there's probably a few people like that. Do I think that this is a political question? This is not a comedy question. So, I mean, I think the sort of like political science over why Trump voters vote for the way they do is a long, complicated discussion that I'm probably not an expert to answer.
Sure.
But do I think that, like, clearly his line about, it's interesting that he talks about political correctness. The only people who talk about political correctness more are club comedians. Yeah. I mean, he's hitting some of the same notes. And I think Trump, interestingly, is a figure who, in comedy for many years, I mean, he did roasts. He is,
he absolutely 100% built up by Hollywood.
Yes.
Very much in their sphere.
Yes.
Very much in that world.
I mean, the book, the reality show, but actually, I think there's another thing I was thinking about recently, which is that a big part of Trump's appeal is transgression. And a big part of, for a long, long time, of the biggest comedians' appeal, including for people like myself, is transgression.
Right.
People laugh at transgression. Now you're starting to see this pushback, this sort of moral pushback on some of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
You have this whole tradition. You know, George Carlin famously said the job of the comedian is to find the line and then cross it, right?
Right.
There's now, I think...
What is the job of the comedian now? To find the line and then go nowhere near it?
No, those are the kind of categorical comments I think are ridiculous.
Right.
Like, there's still plenty of comedians doing that.
Right.
And the government isn't knocking down their doors and
No,
them
of
up.
course not.
There's still plenty of people, and you're doing some of it, and
Sure.
Doug Stanhope's doing it. It's just, there's a higher risk now of being hammered back. But to answer your question, I think that there is some of the appeal of Trump is cultural. And I think some of it is the sort of excitement of transgression.
Yeah.
And so there's something to what you're saying. But the other point...
My point has just been that the response, the cultural response to it, hasn't been that successful.
It never has been.
You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't...
No, I agree with you. The idea that we're going to be saved by actors and entertainers is
crazy.
Is crazy.
And the idea that comedy is important to me is also a problem, because that it's been elevated to this insanely important thing and that it's a big deal. And then the reality is Trump has really re-energized so many failing shows, you know? Comedians that necessarily wouldn't be doing as well. But let me ask Trump.
But let me ask you, because I think it's more interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
I think Trump's something different, right? That's a different discussion. Let's talk about comedy.
Yeah.
Because I think it's interesting to hear a comedian say, and I think you're bold to say it.
Yeah.
I think it's to say, like, you don't like this idea that comedy is important.
I don't.
And you're right. I would say Stewart started it. And I think you're right that there is a direct line between a lot of these pushbacks.
Well, because you can't have it both ways. Because if you blame South Park for the rise of the alt-right, which some people in your profession have done because they're mentally ill, but they've written those articles for Medium and whatnot, and if you believe those things and you believe that all jokes that punch down are making the world unsafe for people, if you believe that comedy is uber important, which it's not. Nobody has ever committed a hate crime because they heard a joke.
But Tim, don't say the same thing over again. Ask yourself the tougher questions, and myself, which is this: is like, do you really believe that comedy? You've dedicated your life to comedy.
Yes.
So have I. Okay.
Yes.
Are we really both comfortable saying comedy is never important?
People have dedicated their life to competitive dance. It's not important.
Okay, I know, but I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Like,
it's important to me, and people love going and being made to laugh.
I think,
sure.
Keep going. Forever, comedians have told us that it's important to laugh, that comedians are satirizing these things.
Yeah.
They're speaking truth to power.
But I know guys my uncles love George Carlin. He was their favorite comedian. They'd go and vote for Reagan. They didn't care.
I know, but the point is either you're right about let's really not have double standards.
Right.
Either comedy is important, right? Or it's some frivolous escapism for blue-haired ladies. If it's important, then it deserves serious scrutiny. If it's not, it doesn't. In my opinion, right? I think your analysis is 100% correct.
Yeah.
That there's a connection between this idea that comedy is important and this pushback, and there is. But my actual point of view is that comedy is important.
Sure.
That, like horror films, the same debate in horror. I love transgressive. I love gross, violent horror films, and there's a lot of pushback there.
Right.
I think that fear is one of the great motivating things. Is fascinating, endlessly fascinating.
Right.
And I think horror and the art of scaring someone is really important, and thus it's important. It can make your life better, just like comedy can make your life better.
Yeah.
It can give meaning to your life, but it also could do damage. And that's the hardest thing for me to really wrap my mind around, which is that I really, and I actually take this to be totally, I don't have double standards. I feel like this about horror too. Like, I watch the grossest horror in the world. Can I honestly say that I think that it doesn't damage me a little bit?
You're not killing people.
I know I'm not killing people, but the question is, does watching really, amoral horror films do anything negative? And if you're being honest,
define negative.
Well, there's all sorts. We could talk about it all day. The only point I'm making is that it's very comforting when we get put in these polarized debate to say, of course, these people are such assholes. But no, what they're doing is treating comedy like it's important. I happen to believe comedy is important. I bet you if I asked you enough questions, I could get you to concede that comedy is important too. You've dedicated your life to it.
Listen, I've dedicated my whole life to it, and there's a lot of people that have dedicated their entire life to all kinds of things that I would not consider important in terms of the way that the country is run necessarily, or...
That's not the only thing that's important, though. I don't think politics is the only thing that's of value.
No, the culture matters, too.
Culture matters more than anything.
But there's so many forces that are more important at shaping culture than comedy. Many of them. Technology, all of these things are really... And the reality is...
It's not either or. It's not either or.
I think if you take subversive comedy and draw a line around it, and push it out of the mainstream, it's a bad idea, because then it's forced to get incubated in the nether regions of the internet, and it'll get incubated by some pretty toxic ideas. I think you need a check on things. Right. I think you need a broad public sphere, a broad public space. I think you need a space for people to be offensive and
Why?
people.
Why?
Because I think
I agree with you.
You blow off steam. Because you blow off steam, you need to explore ideas. You need to find where the line is. Comedy doesn't necessarily have to be always a vehicle for progressive ideas, moral ideas.
Right.
Comedy is its own thing. You laugh without necessarily knowing why you're laughing sometimes.
Tim,
it's a guttural, instinctual reaction.
My interpretation is you're making an argument for why comedy is important right there.
I'm making an argument.
You were saying all this stuff about the public sphere and all this very self-serious.
Yeah.
I agree. You're right, dude. It doesn't have to be progressive. It could be, in fact, maybe a lot of what's great about it is that it could be a check on the same kind of groupthink we always have. I think if we sat down and I asked you to justify, you would think comedy is important for all kinds of reasons that are not political.
Potentially culture is important, but comedy's role in culture to me is not the be-all and end-all. I think we've elevated it. You know, when people go see live comedy, they're going to a club in a strip mall, they're having a few drinks, they're seeing a comedy show, they're going home, they're largely forgetting it, they're forgetting kind of who they saw. To me, it's not necessarily a place where people go to hear philosophy. They don't want to hear how to live from a comedian.
Here's my take.
So when I'm talking about comedy, I'm talking about a very specific type of...
Right, well, exactly. Let's define terms. There's some comedy that is escapist and light and in some comedy that's frivolous, some comedy that is philosophical. There is all that. There's all these kinds of comedy.
Street, and they say, Tim, that's not just a bit. You are fat. And it's true. But what I'm trying to really do is rein it in. And I'm trying to find healthy foods. And you know what? A friend of mine who's a nutritionist talked to me recently about beef jerky. And I want to tell you about a specific kind. LA's original small batch beef jerky. It's a family business from California that's been making quality jerky for 85 years. It is a high protein snack. You got to get rid of carbs. You got to get rid of sugar. Everybody knows what to do. So I've been eating it as a snack, and it's been really working. I'm full. I'm not getting carbs. I'm not getting sugar. It's really, really good. We all snack on it here at Gas Digital. And if you use the promo code TD15, you'll get 15% off. It's really good. It's really tasty. It's smoked. It's made in small batches. And it's marinated, sliced, cooked by hand. It's not factory produced. It's really, really good. And again, this is the trend. Everybody's doing keto. They're doing high protein. This is the direction everybody's heading. And the people that are the best looking are not eating sugar. They're not eating bread. Every hot person I know loves beef jerky. It's a fact. If you see a hot man or woman, they're eating beef jerky. You associate beef jerky with hot people. Do you see somebody you want to fuck? They're eating beef jerky. They're burping beef jerky. They have mesquite jerky breath. You want that mouth on your genitals. So TD15 is the promo code. 50% off the beef jerky, folks. Get the jerky, snack, do some light cardio. The pounds will melt off, and you'll be fucking. TD15, promo code. Get the jerky. PeoplesChoiceBeefJerky.com.
My feeling is that I think one of the great things about comedy today is that there's so many different kinds right now.
Yeah.
Now, there is a downside in the fact that, starting with Jon Stewart, and this is where we agree.
Yeah.
That the important and I see this now with a lot of comedians who, in order to get big, they get treated as important or political. So Michelle Wolf is a great comedian, but when she took the next level to be big because of the White House Correspondents.
Right.
Amy Schumer is a great comedian. She took the next jump when she's like her second season of Inside Schumer, when she started beginning of feminist stuff. Ali Wong, when she took the next jump when she did kind of more political.
Right.
None of them were being honest to their own work. But what happened is the audience expected them then to be politically on board with them.
Right.
And then when they weren't always, they got some backlash. Right?
Isn't it bad for creativity that we don't have a ton of people writing about culture from any other perspective than coastal and left-leaning? Is that an issue? Do you think for a lot of mainstream publications, you have a lot of people? I know you're looking at me like I'm asking a crazy question, but you don't. You're
not asking a crazy question.
A lot of the late night hosts, a lot of people, they all have the same exact viewpoint on everything. You don't find any blue collar people in a writer's room at SNL. You don't find anybody who worked, a union blue collar job that came from Ohio. You find a lot of writers' rooms are staffed with Ivy League people, or if they're not Ivy League, they have the same set of moral standards and values as everybody else. It's very homogenous. Is that an issue? And would comedy be more interesting and funnier if that wasn't the case?
Yes, and you're making essentially a diversity argument, which is very progressive of you, Tim. Listen to you. You just talked about the importance of diversity.
Yes. Straight white men from rural America have been ignored in writers' rooms.
You're talking about class diversity, which I think if you look, let me defend
and ideological diversity, of which there is none.
Well, but wait a second.
Yeah.
There is still, and I think it's hard to see this when you're in the trenches, but there is still more ideological diversity among artists in comedy than almost any other kind of art.
That I agree with.
I mean, there is no Nick DiPaolo in
the symphony, sadly.
Yes, in the symphony.
Sadly, there is not.
Or in Hollywood, there isn't. There is actually quite a more disagreement. And you go to the Comedy Cellar, you could see Ted Alexandro, and you could see Nick DiPaolo, and you could see Jenna Friedman, and you could see John Mulaney. You could see a whole. And you're absolutely right. Also, in terms of, you talk about class.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a class difference between UCB and clubs.
Right.
Ironically, even though I think UCB is more progressive, more consistently progressive, they're worse on labor. And I think they're more homogenous racially than clubs.
They are 100% homogenous racially. It's 35-year-old white people pretending to be cats.
So there is this different. And I think that makes that's part of the problem, right? Is your question?
But can you
but that's
can you say there's no ideological diversity problem when every late night show, every single
you keep saying I said the opposite.
Political
I
news,
disagree with you. You're so stuck in this idea that the enemy disagrees with you that you can't even accept somebody.
No, I know you're agreeing with me.
I agree with you. And you're
so how do we fix it?
The first thing you said was in the press everyone's progressive. Well, that's just bullshit. It's another thing about the press which you're just
a lot of the people that cover culture.
I know a lot, just like a lot of comedians like that. But when you say everyone, it's ridiculous.
Okay. Everyone minus a few people.
I have written about Larry the Cable Guy positively. Okay.
Good.
In the New York Times. You say, it's only the coast. I went to Beaumont, Texas.
Okay.
To go see Larry the Cable Guy.
Oh, good.
And Jeff Foxworthy.
Well, then
I go to Las Vegas.
On my face.
I go to Ohio. I think these are legitimate issues that you're bringing up.
I like the way you say this, like you're going to Syria. You're like, I've been to Ohio. I went there. I did the work. I went on a plane to Ohio. I went to Beaumont, Texas to see Larry, this cable thing. And I stood in line with those orbs of flesh to go see him. Sticky-fingered children. And I stood online with those animals. I take my job very seriously. There's no ideological diversity problem. I went to Texas. Oh my God.
Oh, man. There's no...
I went to Texas.
I just said that. I just agreed with you, but still, there's no...
I know. I'm kidding.
It's just pointless, Steven.
You wrote an article in 2017 said you're excited about the comedy. You're excited about the comedy.
What next, Tim? What next, Tim? What next? What are you going to caricature? Why did I agree to this thing? Why did I agree?
You said you were excited about the comedy bust in 2017, and I agreed with you. I love that article.
One thing that I really made a big mistake was I've written positively about Tim Dillon.
Yeah.
That was,
you said I regret it. You used the word bruising.
I regret it. I regret it. No.
You said in 2017, comedy needs another bust, and you're excited for it.
Yeah.
And why does it need another bust?
I'm trying to remember the exact argument for that.
You said there was a lot of sameness.
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you
exactly. You said it was harder for new comedians to make a splash and even harder for mid-level performers to get to the skyrocketing level of fame. And you said there's a lot of people like Kate Berlant and Rory Scovel that had been around for a while but hadn't gotten to that next level.
No, I do think that's the biggest challenge. I think of someone like you who's a talented comedian.
Right.
Who has gotten traction. You're not a nobody anymore. And I know you're complaining you're not famous, but but the hardest thing, it's harder right now to jump from where you are to the next level. And frankly, the funniest people are on this level, right? They're the people working hardest in the clubs. They're the people who are really refining their art form. They're the people who are focusing on comedy. And part of what I was looking at in the bust article is that there's this common wisdom among the press and among comedians that you had this great time in the bust and boom in the 80s, and you had this great time starting in like 2008 on, and that in between was this fallow period. But actually, it was bad. It was a bad period for the economics of comedy clubs across the country. It actually wasn't a bad period for the art of comedy.
Right.
This is Chappelle was during that period.
Mr.
You had
Show.
The invention of alt comedy with Mr. Show.
Yeah.
I remember writing down on a piece of paper all the amazing comedians in that period, which is supposed to be the terrible period, versus the 80s, where you had some good comedians, sure, but it was a pretty narrow artistic band that was celebrated. And I thought to myself, all right, like maybe there was something, UCB, for instance, started in that period.
Right.
Now it's hardened into this institutional conservative place, but when it started, it was really exciting, and they were taking a risk and trying new things, and there were other UCB-like places that had room to maneuver.
Right.
And you're starting to see, let's put it this way. I think the idea is that there is this idea, and this goes across all art forms, that you have to protect all institutions.
Right.
They're so important. But they're not. They're not.
No, they got to be remade.
The artists are the important. The artists are what makes the scene.
Right.
And if you sacrifice the artists to serve the institution, something's going wrong. And there comes a point in the lifespan of these institutions where they stop serving the artists and they just start serving themselves. And that's where we get to have a problem.
Right.
And this is not just the artist; it's also the consumer. Because my job is to not just think about the artist; it's also to think about, and that has to do with ticket prices, and has to do with accessibility, et cetera. And I think in this time between the booms was actually a pretty exciting time.
Okay. Yeah. So you're thinking that if we thin out again.
I was wrong, but in the sense that
there hasn't been a bust.
What do you think? I see no evidence of a bust, and maybe podcasts are part of it. Is to go back to the original, is that new technology is where you're getting these audiences that didn't show up before. You have all these new national platforms that you can tour, and people can come because of your podcast.
Yeah, and I mean that's helped me a lot, and that's helped a lot of the people that I know out and to acquire and sustain a fan base right now. I think podcasting is vital, and people then come out to see you live. They'll come out to see you do a live podcast, or they'll come out to see you do stand-up.
Right.
But at the end of the day, without that, I don't know where we'd be, because I don't know how many people are watching late night TV. I don't know how many of them are watching specials, Well,
and a lot of people are watching. I mean, look.
What's your opinion of Comedy Central? And do you think they have a future?
I mean, in the last story, I referred to them as comedy marginal, which was not greeted warmly by the people there.
Okay,
but I think they're trying.
What are the
They're
problems?
trying to make a comeback right now.
What are the problems?
Well, Netflix destroyed them.
Yeah, is it just money? Did Netflix just throw money at? And is that what it is?
I mean, we could go on for a while, but the short answer is yes. But now there's people grumbling about Netflix. So now it's got an opening for Comedy Central. I mean, one of the things you asked, what use is there for me?
Do you think if Comedy Central doesn't pick up my pilot, do they have a future?
One of the things that's useful for me is that I talk to people like you, but I also talk to the people who run Netflix, and I talk to the people, and because I work for the New York Times, I talk to the alt people.
Yeah.
I see all over the place, and I see that anyone who says, when it happens on this podcast sometimes, comedy is this, doesn't know what the fuck you're talking about. Comedy is incredibly complicated. There's so many different scenes. It's more complicated than ever now.
Well, I've always said it's very important. Do you think?
And so the answer is, if you want to know what's going on right this second, is that Netflix is starting to have some troubles, and Comedy Central is trying to take back some of the real estate that they lost.
Right.
You see, they're trying to get Bill Burr to
Why is Netflix having trouble? Because they're saddled in debt.
I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but they're looking elsewhere now. They're putting all this money into movies, right? They're trying.
Right.
They're putting.
Have they been a net positive or net negative for comedy in your estimation?
I mean, I'd love to hear what you think about that. I think they've been a net positive, but what do you think?
I've been I think it's a net positive, but I don't really know because it's hard for me to evaluate it because I did. So it's maybe my personal experience clouds the overall judgment of what I would say or not.
Right. I mean, when I talk to A-list comedians, they say it's clearly a net positive because they're getting paid $20 million. When I talk to people on the bottom, when I talk the people who seem to have the biggest beef, and I asked the two people who I said I gave all the criticisms to them.
Yeah.
And I said, look, here's the big criticism seems to me is the people in the middle.
Yeah.
They're the people that are ill-served by you because even if they do get a Netflix special, they get lost. You don't promote them. I
love that there's a platform that you can go see my work 24 hours a day and it's there for eternity.
That's interesting.
But do I love that there's so much content out that it is very hard to stick out or stand out? No.
Right.
I don't love that. But I do love that this is available to anyone that becomes a fan of mine can go check it out. Masculinity is under assault in this country right now. We know that. Okay? How do you prove you're a man? Are you going to have kids, get a wife, pay for a house, do all that shit, raise them to be good people? No. But what you can do is smoke a cigar in your backyard. But you don't know anything about cigars. You're an idiot. You're going to go get a shitty one at the bodega and look like a fool in front of your friends that did better than you in life. Don't. Go to cigarclub.com. It's not for everyday cigar smokers. They're great on special occasions. You don't know anything about cigars. Cigarclub.com is a cigar service that will select cigars specially for you and deliver them right to your door. Okay? You don't know if the corner store has fresh cigars. You don't know if it's a big humidifier. You don't know what's going on. You don't know how well they're taken care of. Cigarclub.com. Cigar Aficionado launched their top 25 cigars of the year in early December. They have featured one of this year's top 25 as a selection in their box at cigarclub.com. So these are the premium, top-of-the-line cigars, and they handpick cigars around your personal taste. You answer a short questionnaire about what you like to drink and your favorite foods, and cigarclub.com pairs you with a cigar that you're going to love, that you're going to smoke. You get a bunch of them. You have your buddies over. You sit in the backyard, you smoke them, and you talk about when you can get Harvey Weinstein back where he belongs, producing films. So go to Cigar Club. I'm a comedian, folks. Don't take it out of context. I'm a stand-up comedian. Kill yourself. Don't do that. Go to cigarclub.com instead. TD15 is the code. I don't know what you'll get for that, but you should put it in anyway. Cigarclub.com, very, very important. Start smoking now, please. At Gas Digital, we're here to tell you that we'd like you to start smoking immediately. Thank you.
So if Comedy Central, HBO, and Netflix all offered you a special,
and
what would you take?
Spoiler alert, they all have. What would I take? I would take, great question. If Comedy Central, HBO, Netflix, at that point I'd be so big I'd probably just put it out on my own website. I'm kind of a revolutionary, Jason. Can't put me in a corner, folks. Very hard. I've been on Red Eye. No, I mean, listen, HBO's great. They curate, maybe to a lesser extent now, but they were curating. I mean, what do you think about that Drew Michaels special? You were kind of...
No, I've spent a lot of time defending that special to comedians. Comedians talk so much trash about that. Comedians, if you get them off the record,
sure,
they all hate that special.
I speak to them. I'm aware.
Yeah, I know. And they say
Drew's a brilliant comic. I didn't love the special, but Drew's a brilliant.
You know what
comedian.
they said to me? They said the only reason he did that was to get people like you to write about it, and
it worked.
And it worked. But you know something?
Don't you think that
I have a bias towards ambition?
Don't you think that the people
and I know Drew Michael kills in clubs with that same material.
Comedian. Yeah.
And if I was him, the one mistake I think he made was I would have released the same set with an audience. So, because people actually come away from that thinking he wasn't telling jokes, which tells you how important an audience is. Like, those are jokes.
Right.
Those jokes work in a club.
Don't you think at this point now you have a big disconnect between people who write about comedy and the people that are watching comedy, because the people that write about comedy are very interested in comedy being subverted and comedy being, interesting. And I've never heard a person say to themselves or their wife or girlfriend or boyfriend, hey, let's go out to a comedy club tonight, but, I don't really need it to be funny. I don't really want it to be funny. I just, let's spend a few bucks and go to a comedy club. But to be honest with you, I don't care if it's funny. Let's just go be with someone and hope they have a perspective. I hope they have a unique voice. Honey, I hope they have a unique voice. I mean, do you see?
This podcast is Tim Dillon.
Are there normal people?
Says what he pretends like he's asking you a question when he's actually just says the same shit that he says week after week.
You guys are.
Do you actually want an answer?
Yes, I want an answer. I want an answer. I do.
Okay, it's a legitimate point for all critics, which is to say that if you spend your time seeing, if you're a theater critic, if you're a film critic, and you probably have more of a bias towards something new and different than your average consumer. The smart critics are very aware of their own biases, including that one, and spend a lot of time, one sense, paying attention to the audience, but also paying attention to not just, is it subverting the form, is it funny? The way you present it is this sort of either-or thing, that it's either funny or it's subverting the form or something. I think, wait a second. The truth is that a lot of comedy is about surprise. So subverting the form or doing something different happens to be the essence of a lot of punchlines.
Right.
It often is funny. It's the idea that it's one or the other, which I hear endlessly from tedious people like yourself.
I love being tedious.
Is wrong. It's obviously self-evidently wrong. I think normal people who've seen a ton of club comedy, if they see Drew Michael doing something
I'm
different,
not talking specific.
I've talked to a lot of these people. The truth is comedians hate Drew Michael's special more than normal people.
I'm not talking specifically about that special. I'm talking about there's a million articles written about comedy needing to change and evolve and grow.
It's not.
And human beings want to go out and laugh because they have real jobs. They drive buses. They work at insurance companies.
Right.
They have families. They have disease. They have real problems. And they go out to laugh. They don't go out to see some wealthy person.
This is the populist.
They don't go out to see some wealthy person
stuff.
indulge themselves and their rich friends in Brooklyn all the time. They want to actually laugh. So to me, I think there is a little bit of a divide between people that are working class that comedy serves a real function in their life.
Why do you condescend to working class people?
I'm not condescending to them.
Why don't they
condescending? I'm a working class person.
The
working man I make brake pads for the working man because that's who I am and that's who I care about.
The honest truth is you're putting your finger on a real thing. Which is that there is a certain sense of critics are a little more elitist than you are. That's true.
Right.
I am to answer your question, what's the purpose of a critic? You can just hire some random guy off the street if you want someone to give you, but actually
I'm available.
You're critics. Yeah, the good critics have high standards. That's true. I would say that if it's important, there's different kinds of critics.
Yeah.
Different kind of critics.
Yeah.
I try to have
that's when critics don't get, or not only critics, and I hate beating up on them, but it's
you love beating up on them.
When people write about ethnic jokes, they don't understand ethnic jokes. It's I've worked blue collar jobs, low wage jobs, where every ethnicity makes fun of each other. That's how people bond. But people that went to Harvard and Yale have never done that. They've never worked a shitty job. They don't need comedy in the same way, and they don't understand ethnic humor.
Do you ever get bored of hanging out with all these straw men? Does it ever get boring?
No. We meet at the dock every day.
Meet at the dock.
These are not straw men. These are real things, and you guys all pretend that they're not. I believe in the American people.
Like everything, there's some truth to what you say, and then using your skills as a comedian, you take it, you go overboard, which is part of why you're funny, right? But it's also why your argument is shit. That's the. No, I think there's a lot to. As I said, there's a lot. Being a critic is much harder than it seems.
Right.
And if you just try to appeal to the lowest common denominator, you get attacked for that too. So the truth is, being a good critic, you have to appreciate all kinds of different kinds of comedy, right? You have to be when I started as a theater critic, I had to go see Broadway musicals, straight plays, experimental theater, and I had to appreciate what's great about all of them if I want to do my job. And that wasn't natural to me because when I was a kid, I didn't like Broadway musicals like I did straight plays.
Right.
I had to teach myself to learn, and I think of comedy the same way. That
you weren't a musical guy. You just plays like Death of a Salesman.
I mean, as a kid, yeah.
Yeah,
yes,
gotcha.
That was but I, as a professional, my job was to be able, especially because musical is such a big part of theater, you had to figure out what was great about them and love them as much as you love everything else. And comedy's no different. And what's interesting is that right now in comedy, there's so many different kinds of comedy going on that is one of the hardest parts of my job, to be able to appreciate ethnic humor and some weird alt thing in Brooklyn that you make fun of.
Right.
And you can't, especially at a place like the Times where you got to cover a wide berth.
Yeah.
For an audience, frankly, which is, who's the audience you're writing for? Everyone's different, but some of the people pay a lot of attention to comedy. Some don't. So, the audience is generally probably more liberal, right? Some not. Well, there you go. So what do you do?
People that are living in an old refurbished church in Beacon, New York, reading the Times on Sunday, petting a rescue dog, and
exactly. So what do you do? When you go to a different comedy room? Do you adjust your material?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm straight for 80% of the rooms I do. I have a wife. She's a little chubby. You know her.
Fang.
Yeah. I mean, you know what I mean? No, listen, I think that there should be a natural clash between comedians and the press. It's healthy.
I agree.
It's natural.
I agree.
I think that to me, there's something fun about the idea that we both love a thing and we come at it from different angles.
Totally, man. That's the best thing you said in this whole thing. I think there's
you're trying to ruin the thing I love, and I'm trying to say, I'm kidding with you.
No,
I'm joking.
No. There are some people in my business who one thing I have a pet peeve of mine is people say, I'm part of the community. I'm part of the comedy community. No, I'm not part of the comedy community.
There is no comedy community.
There's a natural antagonism between you and I.
There should be.
There should be. That doesn't,
absolutely.
We both love the same thing. And
right.
I think you have an incentive for me to be successful, and I have incentive for your people to be successful.
Yes.
But that said, there is a natural antagonism, and that's good. That means something's going right. That there's something at stake. Because this goes back. There's something is at stake here. There's things that really matter.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the point. Comedy's so fucking important. It really is important.
Yeah. Now, before I let you go, your favorite comedian is Owen Benjamin. A lot of people don't know that about you. You love Owen Benjamin.
I don't even know
you're a huge supporter of Owen Benjamin.
That's true.
I always see you donating money to his live streams on YouTube. No, I mean, he was a piano guy and he went crazy kind of,
I don't really even know Owen. I know him from Twitter, but what is he? I don't even know.
He just went super right wing, and now he's in a yard chopping wood and talking about that, the earth might be flat. And, he's making a lot of money. It's a better career move.
Is that true?
Yeah, he's making money.
That's the question. Why don't you go to the intellectual dark web?
Because I'm too beloved by the coasts and the New York Times and the mainstream institutions. As much as you guys hate me, every time I get out, you pull me back in. You pull me back into a meeting in LA
Jordan Peterson.
with avocado
I've
toast.
heard you like Jordan Peterson.
Some of the things he says are
I
great.
know, I know.
You hate him?
No, I don't have any strong opinions.
Why don't you write about Rogan and the West Coast guys? You don't like the West Coast guys.
That is not true. In fact, I think Rogan's speaking of good interviewers, Rogan is a great interviewer.
He's great. Not as good as me.
I like you because you're as belligerent as I hope you would be.
Right. Good.
But Rogan, I have a few people who I've never seen a better interview with than with Rogan.
He's great.
Now I don't agree with a lot of stuff he says, and he does some of this. He does some of the same shit that you do by caricaturing the press. But whatever.
Right.
I respect Rogan. But yeah, do I not cover the West Coast as much as the East Coast? Yeah, that's true.
Which is fair.
You're
an East Coast guy.
I'm an East Coast guy. I'm in New York. I'm biased towards New York. I don't get to see the young comedians over there as much as I get to see young comedians over here. So yeah, but I try to go to LA. That's true. I try to go to LA a couple times a year and to try to bone up, but I probably need to do a better job of that.
No, I mean, listen, you're doing a great job. I mean, the articles are great. Here's the thing. One thing I will say about all of your articles, and read all of them, they're very good. They're very in-depth. You do the work. There's a lot of people that are kind of like drive-by, whether it's like ambulance chase or like, let's just
don't butter me up. Don't butter me up.
No. But your stuff's real. You don't throw something together.
Right.
You don't throw something together. You don't throw a take together, which I respect. You could be right, wrong, whatever, but you don't throw something together. A lot of people throw stuff together because they're in a climate now where long-form journalism's kind of going away.
Well, I'm lucky in that where I write. And if I was 25 years old and working for a website that you had to pump out 20 pieces a week, that would be a different story. So when I started this job, I had been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
And I designed it myself. I designed the position. There's nothing about. I've had a lot of bad jobs in journalism.
Right.
And this is the best one because I got to design it myself. So I made a big point when I started being like, I'm not going to come out every 2 days.
What do you think? Last question. Where do you think comedy goes? Where is it going? Do you see podcasting growing and building? Do you think it's a fad that kind of recedes and there's a reemergence of? Do you think that the megastar is kind of a thing of the past and that the future is going to be small little cults of people with little charismatic cult leaders, clearly mentally unstable ones, kind of like myself?
Tim Dillon is the future.
Is that the future? Is that true?
I do think that the giant star is clearly a thing of the past.
Right.
That's done.
Yeah.
And we're just a bunch of niches. Now, I do think there's, I think there's a hunger for people who break out and Netflix does have this global reach. But yeah, I think you need to have like a real, there's a temptation to develop your audience and your brand, right? What I worry about is that makes narrower and narrower kinds of comedians. And that's both true for Brooklyn hipster stuff and for club stuff.
I agree with you.
You know, let's talk about the most hated comedian in America right now. I'm shocked you didn't ask me about Louis C.K. All right,
I didn't.
But I don't want to talk. But I want to say one thing.
He's also the most talented.
The one thing that Louis did better than any other comedian at his prime
was respect women.
No, this is what he did. Is that when you watch his show, he imagined what the argument of the other side that he didn't agree with and dramatized it both in his stand-up and in his show better than any comedian I've ever seen.
Right.
I mean, the Dane Cook episode is sort of like the cliche example of this, right? Is that and that is a skill that makes for, not only is it like more interesting to argue and talk about, but it makes for better art. And I worry that with becoming so fragmented, and we're such in our niche that we're losing the ability to do that. I agree with you. Not just comedians, but the press too.
You heard it right there. Jason Zinoman, New York Times reporter, said the future of comedy is Louis C.K. You heard it. Get Louis back. He was the only one who knew what he was doing. You heard that. You can find him at Zinoman on Twitter. He's great. You can let him know how excited you are about the future being Louis. We're kidding. You great. Thank you for coming on. I really didn't think you'd come on. I appreciate you coming on.
It was a pleasure.
Do you regret coming on?
No, I don't. No. I had a great time.
We had a great time. No. Tim Dillon's Going to Hell. Comedy on State, Madison, Wisconsin, 17th through the 19th, folks. You're going to really enjoy it. Bring cheese, not hot cheese, cold cheese if it's reasonable to the show. Not a ton of it. I don't want to travel with it, but I do want to eat it. Governor's Comedy Club in Long Island, 25th and the 26th of January. Bring heroin, black tar. TimDillonComedy.com for all dates. I'm going to be in LA from the 10th through early March, getting famous. If you see me out there, avert your eyes. Please, I've got a lot to do. It's very important. Thanks. As always, rate, subscribe, review this podcast on Gas Digital. We got a lot of really cool guests coming up out west. Really appreciate Jason Zinoman coming on. We've tried to get a lot of people from the New York Times on the show. None of them have come on. They've all made up excuses. They were in other departments. We don't hold you responsible. But we appreciate Jason coming on. We love the press. Thanks. Goodbye. The Real Ass Podcast. What can I say? I've never been on it. I don't know what it is, and I don't know who hosts it. It's supposedly affiliated with this network. I guess it's an independent show we're trying out. The host of it is Luis Gomez. I'm reading this off a paper now. Luis Gomez, no middle initial. This is what I'm reading off a piece of paper. Apparently, it's some guy that we're giving it. It's probably one of those Puerto Ricans that's going to come on here and talk about how they need aid. It's like, enough. Figure it out. The hurricane was fucking a while ago. Enough. We're going to keep hearing that. So I guess that's what this show is. Is it a hurricane aid show? The Real Ass Pod? Whatever, man. I don't know what it is. So I guess check it out. Goodbye.
This is the Real Ass Podcast.
Well, I'm going to ask you for the 5th time to stop calling me a man, because quite clearly I am not.
Why isn't Nick Foles on the cover of Madden?
Super clear.
Fuck! I'm not cussing.
Big Dick Nick.
Can't you tell I'm a woman?
Ooh!
This is a store for children. Let's all remember.
It was like
Is that me in the
Pokemon
background?
She starts grunting. She's gonna.
Bumping your gums. You're just going to keep bumping your gums and disrespecting trans people in this store.
Bumping your gums?
Bumping your gums.
You're going to lose money over this.
Stop running your mouth and bumping your gums.
Stop bumping your gums.
I gotta say, I'm gay. I don't think that represents our community.
Look at her flat ass, by the way. I mean, all you need, if you're a trans woman, you just need an ass.
Yeah.
At the very least.
It's like a Kids in the Hall sketch that never got funny.
Scott? Is that Scott?
My friend's trans. That's the first thing she got was an ass.
Yeah, you got to get an ass.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
No, I feel bad for the guy at the GameStop counter. Just like he didn't mean to fucking piss anyone off. He works at fucking GameStop.
Bro, dude, man.
It's like I'm getting paid $6 an hour.
Ryan Broski, chief.
Obviously not a woman. My mouth keeps going. I have a problem.
Can you imagine getting beat down by a transgender at your $6 an hour
point,
job?
She says, you want to see a man? Let's go outside.
Wait, did she
I
say
I
staying
swear
here.
to God. I swear to God she says that. Play it again. I'll watch this again. Play it back. This is fucking, it's one of the best videos of the year.
It's fucking hysterical.
Excuse me, sir. There's a young man in here.
Excuse me, it's ma'am.
Pause it.
It is ma'am.
So another, all right, so keep on playing.
there is a child in there. That's what this lady told her.
Once again,
Like
ma'am.
Randy the Ram Robinson.
No, you said sir. Once again,
So in the
ma'am.
middle of her freaking out about him saying sir,
Right
a woman goes,
beforehand,
excuse
you
me, sir,
said, sir.
I have a child with me.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
That does not de-escalate
Listen,
the
look.
situation.
Excuse me, sir. There's a young man in here.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
I can call the police if you'd like me to. You need to settle down.
She's so calm.
You need to settle down and mind your business, okay? Ma'am, once again, ma'am.
She's chastising her and another person chimes in.
Once again,
Sir,
ma'am.
why are you freaking out on these two people?
It's ma'am.
I'm a fucking man.
Mister, please.
Motherfucker, take it outside.
Motherfucker.
That's the best
I will
part.
show you a fucking sir. I apologize. Motherfucker.
Oh, well, you're right.
I will show you, sir, motherfucker. Then he kicks
A PS4 it looks
the
like.
display down. It's the Xbox 360. Why is it even here?
Call them and talk about how it's misgendered.
Xbox One's been out for a year and a half.
I need
Gosh.
your corporate number now.
I'm here to complain. My creative character is
Get it
broken.
for me now.